Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Bicep for Real. Yeah, if you watched the last video, you probably thought we were done, and we were at the time, but obviously with the cloud, new things are happening all the time, and that applies to Bicep too. And so we've got some new features that have just come out for Bicep that I want to talk about, and I thought it was worth doing a session on. So today we're going to have a look at deployment stacks. Deployment stacks are a brand new feature in the Bicep language. They are in preview at the time of this video, so that's July 2023. And so, make sure that you bear that in mind if you're going to try them out. They're not fully released yet, but they are something that have been coming for a long time. And so it's worth us diving into what they are and why we want to use them. And then let's have a look at applying them to our project to see how that works. So deployment stacks are a feature that's been added to Bicep and ARM that allow you to bring together your deployment into a single unit of work that you can then manage in certain ways. So they're a little bit like a state file that you see with other languages like Terraform and Pulumi and so on. Not to the same extent, but what they allow us to do is to take our Bicep template and deploy it using a deployment stack. And then we can manage all of those resources as an atomic unit using the deployment stack. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, if you have a look at the docs here, there's a few reasons. There's a whole section here on why to use deployment stacks. They bring us a few benefits. Firstly, it makes it easier to deploy resources across different scopes. So I think you remember from before, if we look at doing deployments, you can do them at a different scope. You can do it at a resource group, a subscription, or a management group. But when you run the deployment, you have to pick which one you run that as, and then you can use nested or modules to use different scopes, but it's a bit of a pain. Deployment stacks allows us to group those deployments together and run them as a cohesive unit. So we just say deploy this stack, and it will do all of that for us. It will allow us to apply deny settings. And this is quite important. So there are the ability in Azure to have deny permissions, but they are only exist in two scenarios prior to deployment stacks. You could apply them through Azure Blueprints, and you could apply them through Azure Managed Apps. You couldn't do them any other way. You couldn't just go into the portal and add a deny setting. With deployment stacks, we can also add a deny assignment to a deployment stack. Now, why would you want to do that? This is to ensure that if somebody is managing those resources and wants to make changes, that the only way to make those changes is through the deployment stack and not by going into the portal and fiddling with those resources or deleting those resources by accident. Deny settings can help us to protect those resources so they're only managed through the appropriate process. Another benefit of deployment stacks is cleanup. And this is a fairly big one. So prior to deployment stacks, if you wanted to delete all the resources that you deployed in your templates, the only way to do that was to either go through them manually and delete each one, or delete the resource group, and that would delete everything within the resource group. But if you only wanted to delete certain resources, or you were sharing resource groups between resources or between projects, you couldn't do that very easily. With deployment stacks, it knows what you deployed, a bit like a state file, and so it will allow you to then delete the deployment stack, and it will delete the resources, or it can delete the resources. We'll see that in a minute. It's optional. You can also have those resources what they call detached. So if you remove a resource from the Bicep template, you can either have it deleted or you can have it detached. So it's still there, but it's no longer managed by your deployment stacks. And we'll see that when we have a look at it. And that, the bottom point there, you can use Bicep or ARM templates or template specs for your deployment. So you can use them with whichever, but obviously we're focusing on Bicep. That's the point of this course. So that's what we'll look at. As mentioned, these are in preview. So there are a few issues you can see here, some known issues section around the fact that there are things that you've got to be aware of. Things like the deleting resource groups bypasses the deny assignments that we've applied. Implicitly created resources aren't managed by the stacks. This is something really to be aware of. So if you are deploying something and you define it in your Bicep file, it will be managed by the deployment stack. But if the resources you're deploying then deploy other resources, then that are not defined in the bicep file, the deployment stack doesn't know anything about them and won't manage those. Now, that's not necessarily the end of the world, because if you delete a deployment stack, it will delete the resource that you created, which will usually delete the resources that it created by itself. But you just need to be aware of that. That's probably the biggest one to be aware of. There's a little one here. We've used the CLI command to modify existing stack. Pressing no doesn't actually halt the process, so you need to press Control C. That seems like a fairly interesting bug, but there you go. Yeah, so those things to be aware of. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and have a look at doing this for our Lambda Toys project, the project we've been using for the rest of this. So let's switch over to VS Code just quickly. And for the purposes of this demo initially, I've commented out the container apps and the APIM one, just because they take a while to do. So we're just going to look at using the core.bicep piece here. For some reason, VS Code's IntelliSense has decided there is an issue with the parameters for my module, despite the fact that I wrote this module. I'm not sure why. We'll see that in a minute. But we're just going to run the core bicep initially, and let's have a look at how that works. I haven't tried running the deployment stacks with this project yet. This is the first time I'm going to do it. So we're going to do it live, and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so here we are at the CLI. We're in our Lambda Toys project folder. So you remember we've got that main bicep, which we're going to deploy. We're going to use the Azure CLI for this. And so to do that, we need to make sure that we are on the latest version, or the version, I believe it's 2.50 or later. So yeah, 2.50.0 or later. Or if you're using Azure PowerShell, 10.1.0 or later to be able to use deployment stacks. And so the command is az stack. And then group, so we're doing this at the resource group scope. If you want to do it at the subscription scope, then it would be sub. And if you wanted to do it at the management group scope, it would be ng. So we're going to do it at the group scope. And we want to create. So do some multi-line so it's easier to read. Except I'm not in Linux, so that would makes sense. Apologies for that. Yeah, so we'll just do it on one line. So you need the name of the stack that we're going to create. So we'll do Lambda API dev. We need the resource group. Which is that one. We need the template file name, which is going to be main.bicep. We need to tell it the parameters file we're going to use. I meant to spell that. And where are our parameter files? I forget now. So they're in configurations. And then we want it's dev.json, isn't it? Our parameters file. No, just plain that. There we go. And then we need to give it some specific parameters for deployment stack. So there are a couple of ones we can use. So the first one is what we do with resources if they are removed from the deployment stack. So do we want to detach them, or do we want to delete them? If you want to detach them, which means that the resources stay where they are, they're just removed from the deployment stack, but they're not deleted from Azure, we don't need to add anything. That's the default state. However, if we want to clean them up when we're done, then we need to add a parameter, and there are a couple of different parameters. So the first one we can add is --delete all. And what that will do is if anything's removed from the deployment stack, it will get deleted. Pretty straightforward. We can have delete resources. This will delete any resources that are removed from the deployment stack, but it will not delete any resource groups. The reason for that is obviously that resource groups contain resources, and if you delete a resource group, it will delete all of the resources within that resource group. If you're using those resource group for something else, or you don't want to delete all of those resources, then you wouldn't want to delete the resource group. Finally, there is another flag which you can use in combination with delete resources, which is delete resource groups, which will then tell it to also delete resource groups. Now, this is only applicable if you use delete resources. And as far as I can see in the docs, that's pretty much the same as using delete all. So I'm not entirely sure why you'd use both. But anyway, so what we're going to do with this one is we're going to say delete all. I want to clean this up. Then the last thing we can do is look at how we protect those resources against deletion. So these are the deny assignments. And again, there's a couple of options we can do. So the first one is there is a deny settings mode command, and this determines what deny assignment you are applying. So the options are none. Obviously, there's no deny assignment applied here. There is deny delete, which prevents anyone from deleting the resources but doesn't prevent anyone from changing them. And then there is deny write and delete, which obviously does what it says on the tin. It prevents you from writing or deleting the resources, so you can't do anything. There are a couple of other settings to go alongside this as well, and this one's quite long, so I'm just going to copy and paste it so you can see it. So there is deny settings apply to child scopes. So this determines whether or not your deny assignment is passed on to nested resources under the managed resources. So I mentioned before, if you have some resources that are created automatically by things that are deployed, one that jumps to mind is AKS. It creates a managed resource group and resources in it. That will apply to that scope. There is the deny settings excluded actions command. So this one. And this allows you to exclude some properties or some settings from the deny one. So if we stick an example one in here. So this option here basically excludes from the deny assignment the writing to virtual machines and the deletion of storage accounts. So this won't prevent anyone from doing those two things, but it will prevent anything else. And then finally, you have this one, deny settings exclude principals, which allows you to exclude users or service principals from having the deny assignment applied to them. So if you want to allow certain people to come in and do those sort of things, you can have them do that. Right, so I'm just going to clean some of that up. So for the purposes of the demo initially, I am going to set the deny set mode to none. So this should deploy our template. It should use that Bicep file. It should set it up so that if we then later remove a resource from our template, it will delete it and won't set any deny settings. And we'll change the deny settings later and have a look at that. But let's see if this works. So as you can see, it failed. It complained about that core bicep error that I thought was just spurious. It looks like the core bicep module is being pulled from that container registry. For some reason, it's not in line with what's actually in the file. I'll have a look at fixing that later. But for the moment, I've just changed the code so that it points over to the actual one in the file system. Let's see if that makes it any better. So that's running now. It's complaining about all those parameters because we commented out the other pieces, so ignore those for now. But that's going to go ahead and run the actual deployment script. And so we'll wait for that to complete and then come back. Okay, so that's completed. You can see now the deployment stack gives you some information in the CLI about what it's deployed and all of the resources that are in the stack. But you can also go to the portal and see that. So let's have a quick look over there. So this is our resource group. You can see the resources deployed here, as you would expect. And then on the left, we've now got this new deployment stacks icon. So if we go in there, you can see our Lambda API Dev deployment stack. And if you come in here, you can see all the resources that were deployed in that deployment stack. You can see the deny status, which at the minute is none. And you can look at some of the the other information. You can see the inputs, and you can see the things, the actual deployment details and stuff, everything else you get with that. So that's fairly straightforward. So you can see all that information. So now let's have a play about with some of the deletion pieces. So if we go back to VS Code, and we're going to look at, we're deploying our core resources. So let's say we want to get rid of something. Let's find something that's not that important and that hasn't got dependencies on it. Have we got anything in here? Let's go with Keybolt. So let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of the whole Keybolt. So let's just comment that out. So we're removing that from our deployment template. Don't want that anymore. So to update that, we need to rerun the deployment stack. Now, If you're using the PowerShell command, you can run the create, or there is a set command which allows you to update the existing one. Either work, it doesn't really matter. For the CLI, there is only the AZ stack group create command. If you run that against an existing one, it will say it's going to update it. So let's just run that again. And it should tell us, there we go. So it's kind of come in and it's saying this already exists. The following actions will be applied to resources that are no longer managed by the deployment stack after it's deployed. So it's telling you what's going to happen. It is deleting resources and resource groups, and you can say yes or no as to whether you want to do that. Now, that's not saying it's going to delete the resource groups now. It's just telling you that if you have removed them, they will get deleted. So if we run yes, that should fall over because I have obviously complained about not edited some output. That's my fault. That's not the deployment stack. So if we go to VS Code, we've got this output here that's dependent on that. So it's complaining about it. I think that's the only one. So let's go back to CLI and run it again. Yes. And this should go ahead and delete that key vault. Okay, so that's finished. So if we hop on back to the portal, and we should see when I refresh is that key vault has gone. Yeah, there we go. That's all fine. So that all worked as expected. So when we delete those resources from the Bicep file, they get deleted here. There was no need for me to go in and manually delete them, which would have been the case before deployment stacks. If I'd rerun that Bicep, it would have just ignored the fact that those key vault was no longer there. It wouldn't have done anything with it. So that's the big benefit. The other piece is that we can obviously delete the whole deployment stack and actually clean everything up. Now we'll do that in a minute. Before we do that, we're going to have a look at the deny assignment. So we're going to go back to the CLI and we are going to change our deny assignment from none to deny write and delete. So that should prevent any changes to the resources. So we'll run that again. I've also added the key vault back in, so it's going to redeploy that key vault so that we can test with that in a moment as well. Okay, this failed, and this is something I wanted to highlight because this actually, somebody mentioned this on Twitter today as well, and it's quite a good point. So we tried to recreate the key vault there, and it's failed because of soft delete, and this is going to break quite a lot of things with deployment stacks, but other infrastructure code as well. So when we put it back in again, it tried to recreate the key vault with the same name. It can't because there is a key vault already soft deleted that hasn't been purged with the same name, and so it's complaining about that. And this kind of breaks the whole automated deployment of the deployment stack because I have to go in and manually intervene now and deal with this key vault. So something to be aware of for things with soft delete resources. And this, to be honest, this happens with other languages when using Terraform or Pulumi or whatever with the stat file as well. It's the same sort of thing. You can solve it by adding a random suffix to your key vault or something like that. We're going to have to deal with that. So let me just go and fix that, and we'll come back. Okay, this failed again, but it highlights something I wanted to make sure people were aware of. So the failure is basically saying it created the key vault, but it can't create the private link because it doesn't have permission to set the private link on the VNet because it's blocked by a deny assignment. So if we go back to the portal and look at our deployment stack, you can see here that the deny write assignment, all right, delete, has been applied here already. And this obviously got applied before it then tried to deploy the key vault. But it's the same principle, whatever. I am the person deploying the stack, but I don't have rights on this now. So I wanted to try and make this clear that by applying the deny assignment, these apply to everything. There isn't some magic that the deployment stack does to be able to bypass the deny and write when you actually do the deployment. So if we go in and delete that key vault again and run it now, it would fail because it can't delete them because of the deny assignment. So you must use the exception piece to add this exception to the deny assignment to whatever account you're going to use to do your deployments. Otherwise, nothing can do anything with this. You won't be able to do any deployments. You won't be able to clean it up and do the deletion and so on. So we're going to need to add an exception to the deny assignment, in this case for my account. So let me just go grab the object ID from my account and then we'll do the same. But generally, if you're going to automate this process, you would do that for a service principal or a managed identity or something like that to do that. But that's just to be aware of, for the deny assignments. There isn't any magic in deployment stacks. The magic is that it allows you to create them, which you can't do anywhere else. But if you want to actually be able to deploy or delete them later, something has to have an exception to that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do it. Okay, so the command we need is deny settings excluded principals. And we're just going to add the object ID for my user. And that hopefully should then add that as an exception and then allow us to do the deployment. Now, I'm not sure the order this is going to do in, so it may fail again and then we have to run it again. I don't know. We'll see what comes at the end of it. Okay, so that's finished. Now, I did have to run it twice. So the first time I ran it, it failed because I think it hadn't deployed, hadn't applied the new deny exception before it got to the resource. But when I ran it again, it had now succeeded. And just to show you how that looks, so if we go back to the web app, so you can see in here, we've got the deployment stack and you can see the deny properties here. If you go into deny assignments, you can see also the exceptions to those in here. You can also look at that in the permissions tab as well. So if you go back over here and we go look at the VNet and go to access controls and you can see deny assignments, you can see this one created. You can see it says it's got excluded principals. If we click here, you can also see that this is my account that's been excluded. So fairly straightforward to see how that is working. Okay, so that's all done now. We go back to the resource group. So we've got those resources. Our key vault's been recreated successfully this time. And so the last thing we're going to do is just look at deleting the whole of the stack. So if we go back to the CLI, and so the command we need instead of the create command, surprise, surprise, is the delete command. And we then need to tell it how to deal with deletion. So this doesn't follow the same setting that you used when you created. That was just for adding and removing whole resources. For the stack, we can specify again how we want to do it. So it's the same command. So we're going to say delete all is our command. And the last thing, that'll run fine, but it'll ask you for a confirmation. We can pass the yes command as well if we don't actually want to see the confirmation. That would be useful for automation and so on. If we hit that, that should go ahead and delete the stack. And that should remove all of the resources. Now remember, we didn't create the resource group in this particular instance with our Bicep file, so it won't delete the resource group in this scenario. But if we had created the resource group with this stack, then it would also get deleted as well. So after waiting quite a long while, the deletion actually failed for some reason, and it's not a very helpful error message. So obviously, this might be part of the preview issue, but it's failed. The resources are still there, so I can try again now if I wanted to. I'm not going to do it right now because it took a long time for that to fail. So I'll feed this one back. Maybe there is an issue with the deployment stack preview. Not sure at this point, but it should have deleted, and it did delete some of the resources. So if we hop over to the portal, you can see, a lot of those resources have gone. The Cosmos DB's gone. The Key Vault's gone. It's just the VNet and the things along with that have some reason hung around. Not sure why. Might be because of this. So this could be the reason, to be honest. This network card would have been auto-generated by the private endpoint. And as we mentioned before, if you have auto-generated resources, the deployment stack doesn't know about them. Now, deleting the private endpoint should have done that. The private endpoint's still here. So actually, maybe it's not that at all. I say there was another private endpoint in there previously and I did clean it up. So no, ignore that. That's probably not the case. So I'm not sure why that failed. I'll have to have a look into it. If you look at the deployment stack, you can come in here. You can actually see the error as well, but it's pretty much the same error message. I don't think the raw error is going to give us any more. No, it's pretty unhelpful. So I can feed that back to the team and see what they say. But yeah, that should have deleted everything, and that hopefully when you try it, that will delete all your resources. and yeah, hopefully in the future I can get that to work and I'll update the video. But that's what should have happened. And then what you would have been left with here would have been an empty resource group, and the deployment stack wouldn't exist anymore. It would be here, it would be gone. So yeah, that's deployment stacks. That's how it works. How would we use that in our project? So in our Lambda Toys project, we've got 3 different environments. If you remember, we've got our dev, test, and prod environments, and we're deploying them through our pipeline. And so what we would probably do is we would create a deployment stack for each of those pipelines. And why would we do that? Well, the main benefit we're going to get there is that deletion when it works. So if we wanted to have our pipeline, spin up the test environment, do some tests and destroy it, there's an easy way to do that by deleting the deployment stack. The second piece there is we can apply those deny assignments. We don't want anyone fiddling with our resources. The only way that we should be able to make changes is by going through that pipeline to deploy them. So, a change would have to be make a change to the Bicep file, commit it to source control, get it peer reviewed, merge the change, run it through the pipeline and deploy those resources. We can use the deny assignments through deployment stacks to make sure that that's the only way that happens. We would add an exception to the deny assignment for the service principal that's doing our pipeline. We would make sure nobody else has those credentials. And then that would ensure that the only thing that can actually make changes to that environment is the deployment stack and the pipeline process. And that's how we would implement it for Lambda Toys. So I hope that was useful. I hope you can see how deployment stacks are a useful feature. Hopefully that we won't see the error I did if you try them out, but obviously be aware they are in preview. Hopefully they won't be too long in preview and we will get a stable approach soon. But yeah, that's all there is. Right now, I haven't got any more episodes planned for the Bicep for Real course, but as with this one, if a new feature comes along that we want to look at, I will absolutely do another video. So hope you enjoyed that and have a great rest of your day.